Hello again. My name is A.Torres. I teach Spanish and Ballroom Dancing at Xavier College Prep High School in Palm Desert, California. Today we're going to talk about rubrics. All good assessments contain roadmaps to success. A major part of assessment is having a good metric by which students will be graded. Rubrics allow us to do this. This is one very easy yet vital way of carrying out our care for the whole student. It isn't enough to simply have a grading point scale from 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest point value possible, without qualifying quantities. Again, this isn't caring for our students. So how do we do this? How are rubrics helpful? Rubrics lead us to assess standards-based processes, progress, and results. Always starting with the end in mind, we set expectations for each part of the learning process. Rubrics allow us to demystify the educational goals, objectives, processes, and outcomes we set for our students. Clear communication about what is being graded, why it's important, and how work will be evaluated is key and evident in rubrics. Again, rubrics help us get rid of moving targets. Clear communication is essential. Rubrics also invite, include, engage, and empower students as partners in their own education. And rubrics build and provide for practice of students' own academic voice in subject-specific language. Rubrics help students learn how to become better evaluators of their own work. A rubric actually can make the grading process easier. A rubric is objective. Expectations are transparent to students. It's universal. Same expectations for everyone. It's democratic. I like to have my students understand the rubric in advance and even give them the opportunity to provide input before we finalize the assignment so as to create a higher degree of ownership in the process. So where do we start? What goes into creating a rubric? These are the essential components of a rubric. Criteria. Rubrics usually contain 4 to 7 major criteria. Make sure that each criterion is always related to particular standards-aligned and level-appropriate learning objectives for knowledge and skill. Consider including 2 to 3 sub-criteria for each major criterion to be more intentional about what it is you're evaluating. Rubrics also have 3 to 4 levels of achievement / performance / mastery. And rubrics also have measurable descriptors for each criterion and level, containing precise descriptive modifiers of quantity and quality. So here's an example. These are some keywords that you can see at different levels of mastery: not meeting expectations, progressing or developing, proficient, and exemplary. You'll notice when we take a look at some of these words, none, fewer than, more than, all, never, seldom or rarely, sometimes or often, always, unclear, somewhat unclear, some degree of clarity, clear, illogical, somewhat reasonable, reasonable, logical, irrational. So again, you can see a progression here, a natural progression in the descriptions as you move across levels of achievement, performance, or mastery. It's also important to know that there are a couple of approaches to a rubric. There is a holistic approach. There's also an analytical approach. Holistic is something that you typically see as part of the AP scoring process. Analytical rubrics tend to be more common. So how do we implement rubrics? You should use rubrics as a companion of a prompt or a set of formal instructions for any major activity or project. It's important to train students on how to use rubrics. Read directions of the assignments at hand with your students. Also, read the rubric in class, practice active reading, and answer any clarifying questions your students may have about the rubric as well as the assignment. Let's take the culture comparison task for AP French Language and Culture, for example. So here we see there are directions and there is a prompt. And here we have the rubric. Again, this is a holistic approach to a rubric. This is the approach that is used when evaluating AP exams, typically. It can be easier to create and generalize a body of work. A holistic rubric contains multiple criteria. So you can see here as you go down, there are bullet points. There are multiple criteria. But they're bundled by score or degree of performance, achievement, or mastery. So in its entirety, you see all of these criteria that fall into the score of 1 or level of mastery poor. In other words, an overall grade is based on the larger description scale to a specific scale number or grade range. This approach asks the grader to paint a broad stroke over the entirety of a student's work. Now, let's take a look at a student who might be in a couple of ranges here, but again, based on the evaluation of this task, you might find that a student might be here in these areas. And so again, a student doesn't necessarily fall directly into one category. They might be across 2, 3, or even 4. But again, as I mentioned earlier, painting a broad stroke, this is going to be where the student finds him or herself most likely, based on the way that this rubric was used to score a student's work. So the overall score would be a 4, which would be an indicator of a good performance on this task. It's important to also know that using a holistic rubric, it's also important to know that using a holistic rubric can be more difficult to grade accurately and give detailed feedback on student work. Again, because you have to use an overarching score of a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5, that does make it a little more difficult. So this is the Spanish project that I used for my level 2s. The prompt is, you are a famous cook and you will be preparing a recipe for a television show. I indicate what their process should be here step by step. I indicate what must be part of the video and additional requirements to make sure that the video is most complete. And my analytical rubric looks something like this. Again, this is a fairly typical or most common seen type of rubric. I took it and go through step by step. So here we can see that there are 6 different types of criteria. I have content, communication. I have 2 different types of communication that I want to target: structures, aesthetics, and process. You'll also notice that there are subcategories here for each criterion. You can also see here that now across the column headers, I have my levels of performance on this project. And as you begin to go through from left to right, left being highest number of points possible, right being the lowest number of points possible, I use words like extensive description, sufficient description, limited description. For communication, provides an inventive way of explaining things that engage and entertains the audience, versus an adequate way of explaining things that engage the audience, and then a repetitive way of explaining things that engage the audience. Should have included the word boring in there. In terms of proficiency and fluency, I think this is different from this method of communication. So being at a more authentic level, speaking with no hesitation or very little hesitation. Having an adequate pronunciation level of fluency with some minor hesitations, and having an inadequate level of pronunciation or fluency with major hesitations in the production of speech. In terms of the structures that were being studied, I want to make sure that students are able to use and apply the use of the commands and direct object pronouns as close to a flawless level as possible. If there are some errors and it's sufficient or adequate, it would be labeled good. And if there are just a lot of errors and there's very little demonstration of command of these 2 structures, I would probably give the student just 1 point. In terms of aesthetics, this is a good way to hone in on 21st century skills. One thing that is important in making an audiovisual production is making sure there's a nice balance between voice, background music, and different sounds. If there's a nice elegant balance, again, using words like elegance helps trigger in the student's mind, okay, and I need to really make sure I refine some of these aspects, versus there being a satisfactory balance or a lack of balance. Also, command of the camera is important. I don't want to see any Blair Witch Project videos, and I don't want to take a Dramamine to watch some of these videos. Sometimes I'm surprised at the amount of movement, camera movement, that is part of the student's process. So again, wanting to make sure that I use a nice elevated word like finesse and movement to camera and sophisticated framing to capture the essence of the process versus having a satisfactory balance or satisfactory management to camera movements, and then just a total lack of care, lack of balance for these elements. And then lastly, in terms of process, I wanted to include a little bit of that early process into the rubric. I want to make sure that that was considered, taken, and respected in preparation for this project. I'm going to move my camera over here. Now you may notice that on the right side under total points, I have a different weight for each criterion. This is most relevant to language production and application. So these scores are going to have double the weight of the aesthetic and the process value. Again, this is something that is important in the grading of my students, but I want to make sure that I focus more on the skills that are being targeted within the context of world language acquisition. These aspects are secondary learning objectives that I want to accomplish. Okay, so here is another example of an analytical rubric. Let's do my ballroom dancing class as an example. Again, you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 criteria, and there are 4 levels of mastery that I have indicated in my rubric. Now, this is a rubric that I use for the entire school year. The only thing that changes is the dance. So anything from tango to waltz, salsa, cumbia, merengue. But this rubric is fairly consistent. This allows me to make sure that I'm constantly reviewing this information with my students. They are well trained in utilizing this tool. And again, for the entire semester, there are no surprises. From my first unit to my very last unit to the final exam, this is it. This is what I base my grading on. So my ballroom dancing criteria. These are my performance levels. I will be evaluating school figures, posture and frame, footwork, timing, and musicality. Again, so just an example, let's take a look at some of the descriptors that I utilize. All school figures are executed perfectly. Most school figures are perfectly executed. Most school figures are executed with an adequate degree of precision. Most school figures are executed with an insufficient degree of precision. Looking at posture and frame, impeccable posture and frame are sustained throughout the sequence. Body carriage creates a sophisticated appearance. Again, so using keywords that create an image in the mind of the students is something that I'm really aiming for here. Well-balanced posture and frame, body carriage creates a stable appearance. Again, this still demonstrates proficiency in terms of performance. When considering a developing level, fluctuating posture and frame, and visible carriage creates a novice appearance. So you can definitely tell if the student is a beginner. Again, little to no care for this criterion. And then poor posture and frame, and there is just an inappropriate appearance. So again, this is just doing like a free-for-all, very little care to this element here. In terms of footwork, you can see that there is a strong, sharp precision in terms of the execution of the footwork and foot placement. Strong footwork with most movements being sharp, but some minor errors in placement here. Sufficient footwork, movement lacks sharpness, and there's some errors in foot placement versus a total inadequate placement of the feet that negatively impact the execution of the overall sequence. I'm going to move myself out of here so you can see this. In terms of timing, every step is given the exact value that is needed to be completed. For 4 points. For 3 points, timing is appropriate. Timing is rushed and off, but still allows for sufficient demonstration, that would get you 2 points. And when there's little to no awareness of timing, again, that expectation is just not met. And then finally, musicality, which is to what degree the steps are in sync with the music. We have wholly being synchronized, mostly being synchronized, somewhat being synchronized, and not at all being in sync with the music. So this is an example of, within the context of performing arts, a rubric that I use on a regular basis. So within a larger context, this is a document that I provide students for every single dance. We use this document at the start of each unit, the start of each dance, and then we always refer to this document. Again, that way when it comes time to do our final checkout for this dance and final performances, we have been working with this document throughout the entire unit. Again, this is the exact same document I use for the final routines and final assessment at the end of each semester. So there is an analytical component, the same rubric that we just saw. We have a further breakdown of school figure patterns. So what dance moves am I looking for, and to what degree are they exemplary, proficient, or developing, or if I didn't see it at all, non-applicable. I also have a way to try to capture in a holistic manner words that would be utilized to describe the overall performance. And again, I have a series of words here down below that are used to characterize the performance. And then I also want to make sure that I have space available for being able to provide students detailed qualitative feedback. Again, we utilize this on an ongoing basis, and we come back to this on a weekly basis, actually, with each unit lasting about 4 to 5 weeks. I asked my students to fill this out for themselves. This is a self-evaluation. We also have peer critiques that are constantly taking place. So I have a gentleman and a lady who are going to be evaluating twice in the unit, another gentleman and lady. And then I also use this tool to give students feedback. Constantly recording my students, so not only do they have the experience of dancing through a sequence or routine that they then apply this to, but based on the playback of videos, they also have that reference to come back and look at this from a different perspective. So in summary, rubrics take the guessing game out of assignments and help students stay on target by setting clear expectations in writing. Rubrics are our friends, and they are companions to assignments that we assign. The time has come for us to now look at our assignments projects and figure out what approach to a rubric would be best suited for the individual assignments, as well as how to get a rubric structured to meet my learning objectives desired for the students. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. You're always welcome to borrow a rubric from a friend or from the internet. There are a lot of templates out there. However, be mindful that transplants don't always work. Feel free to customize your rubric to make sure that it fits your needs, your learning objectives. Sometimes it's just a lot easier to create your own. Whether it's for a literary project, a cultural project, multimedia presentation, an essay or major writing assignment, nor presentation or performance, make sure that you include a rubric. Rubrics await you. I look forward to seeing what you come up with. Thanks again for your time. Good luck. Bye-bye.